Thank you very much for this very nice presentation, but I hope you will not be disappointed after all what you said. So, yes, I'll try to expose rather briefly part of my current research that will be published next year in a forthcoming book. It's in French, so you'll have it in English here. I mean, not really in English, but in trying to do it in English. When I started my dissertation some 20 years ago, on Buddhism, I faced numerous difficulties. Working on Buddhism within the frame of social sciences, at least in France, wasn't easy at all. First of all, because of the prejudices of my own colleagues and of the masters of the disciplines, social sciences, anthropology, political science, who laugh at me regularly, pretending that there was absolutely nothing social about those Westerners who decide to sit on meditation. Easily explained with the theory of the anarchic multiplication of beliefs and practices in our postmodern anomic societies. Buddhism was just for them a question of doing something, not to be bored, or at least not to be too depressed. So it doesn't need sociological tools and all those things. Moreover, my dissertation was, at least at the beginning when I started it, more precisely in political science, especially in political science. So I could hear almost every day that there is nothing involving politics in Buddhism, especially in Buddhism in the West, they will say. Intuitively, I didn't agree, even though I didn't have enough empirical evidence to respond at the time. I tried to explain that, in a way, one of the innovations of Buddhism was actually political. To declare that one is not a Brahman or even noble person by birth, but can become so intentionally by the very action of his body, his mind, his speech, by his right behavior, right concentration, right talks, etc., etc., has tremendous political consequences. Meditation, on the contrary, was only a practice non-specific to Buddhism, even if most Buddhists use it, among other practices, to reach the aim of their religion. At the time, I could not convince anybody, except my director, who didn't know much about Buddhism anyway. So wasn't a specialist of Islam. He thought, oh, that's great what you're saying, but basically didn't know anything about it. That was much easier with him. Especially, actually, I couldn't convince anybody, especially because French Buddhists belonged, in their vast majority, in the past, in the vast majority, to the category that I constructed later during my research of what I call the intimate Buddhists. Those who are just and only preoccupied by their own personal intimate transformation versus engaged Buddhists. It is only since the mid-90s that actually engaged Buddhism is really developing in France. Even if we have one of the founder of engaged Buddhism in France, actually, that interests only Anglo-Saxon. When I visited there, I did many surveys there, and basically you speak English, because there are no French people, only since the 90s. The reason of this late development being the general suspicion in the context of French laicity towards any social engagement coming from religious groups. But as if it weren't enough, I was not only told that Buddhism couldn't be studied as an interesting object of social sciences and couldn't at all have anything to see with political science in particular, but that it wasn't even a religion. I actually started to think that there was some kind of plot against this object, Buddhism. What was amazing as I started my interviews with Western Buddhists is that many of them actually agreed with my colleagues and friends and did not understand at all what I was looking for. I remember in the beginning of my fieldworks, I was following a Zen session during 1 week. And a Western monk, a student of the famous Taisen Deshimaru, founder of the AZI, International Zen Association, and he saw me taking notes after a Zazen period and came to me with an ironic smile to ask me, "What are you writing? There is nothing to write about." And I decided to be completely honest. And I told him I was doing my PhD on Westernized Buddhism. We started the conversation, and at the end of it, obviously annoyed, he told me, "You are not going to discover what is Zen with your method. You just need to sit if you want to know Zen, nothing else." It was really a Soto Deshimaru kind of thing. You just sit. I think I annoyed him even more when I answered him that I didn't care about knowing what is essentially Zen. But I only want to know what it is socially. What are those people? Why are they doing that? Why here? Why now? Why aren't they in a Catholic church or in a soccer stadium instead? And I concluded in saying, which actually annoyed him even more. I mean, we stopped talking and I finished the session at that moment. I said, when I was saying that what he can talk about, I can't, because I'm not seriously practicing. But on the other hand, what I can talk about, he cannot, because he is too much of a serious practitioner. I realize after about 4 years of my fieldworks, I mean, it lasted 9 years to do my dissertation. I mean, I know here you are not supposed to last so long, but now we don't last so long too. We imitate you only 3 years after we get slapped. And so the 4th year was just the beginning. So I realized after about 4 years of fieldwork, that those two ideas, Buddhism is not political, and Buddhism is not a religion, were the keys of my research, but in unexpected ways that would eventually allow me not only to say something about Buddhism in the West, but about the current transformations of politics in general and about current transformation of religious belief in general. Why don't we see any politics in Western Buddhism and in Buddhist speeches, at least at the time? My answer was because it is too radically political to be seen as political, or at least at the time. What do I mean? I mean that the Western Buddhist speeches redefine the meaning and the scale of what is politically pertinent. Politics is all about defining what are the collective finalities, and what do we do collectively to reach them. If people like intimate Buddhists pretended at the time they didn't care about politics, it is usually because they saw politics as some national sterile game to obtain the power in a state. But in the same time, they were showing interest in global issues that they will not call politics, because for them politics will mean something dirty. So they were interested in the same time in global issues like ecology, healthcare, global peace, etc., etc., which actually are the new real issue of human politics on a global scale. So Western Buddhists would not use the word politics because it was too negatively connoted, but they actually redefined politics on another scale, even if they don't use this word. They were not the only one to do that at the time, but they were at the heart of this change of scale. Now, why some say, and some Buddhists themselves, that Buddhism is not a religion? The answer is here more complex. But I ended up showing that if they say so, it is mostly because religion, as they know it in its classical concept and traditional meaning, cannot answer their religious needs. So because they find that with Buddhism, they prefer not calling it a religion. They will say it is a way of life, it is a philosophy, it is a mental training, and most successful among those words, it is a spirituality. I think, paradoxically, that to understand what is socially at stake here, we need to consider Buddhism as a religion, at least, At least if we don't want to participate at the sterile and illusory quarrel of words that have been predominant in the field of religious studies in recent decades under the so-called false problem of secularization, desecularization. So let's find a definition of religion to see if Buddhism is one. Providing a definition is always arbitrary, yet it is still more arbitrary to have no precise definition, because one can then be elusive, justifying anything according to circumstances. However, the least arbitrary of definitions are certainly, at least in science, in social sciences, those that are the most effective, the most productive. In other words, a good definition must include all the phenomena we want to target, but such phenomena only, which is why we stand in need of common denominators. A good definition must also exclude all other phenomena, otherwise anything could be religious. The right definition, therefore, will be one which strikes the best balance between inclusion and exclusion. It is often said that it is very hard to find just such a balanced definition for the word religion. But sincerely, I cannot concur. I tend rather to believe that we have a hard time in defining religion only subjectively, because it is hard for us to kick our cultural prejudices on what a religion is supposed to be, for instance, encompassing faith in an almighty God, while objectively it is extremely easy to find such a correct definition, according to the criteria I will try to provide. So here comes my own definition of religion, both simple and I think effective, at least in the framework of what I have to say here. There are, I think, three dimensions to define a religion. First dimension, a global conception of reality. Not only a conception on art, on this or that, but a global conception, what the German would call a Weltanschauung, conferring on everything, every event, from the standpoint of ultimate belief, a certain color, a certain place, a certain hierarchy in things. But this is not enough. It is still too inclusive, because it might include, for instance, a global philosophical doctrine. So we need a second point. This global conception must include the idea of a transcendent salvation, more exactly a theory of the way out from the here and now. Even if this way out takes the form of a way in, as in the Western interpretation of Buddhist nirvana as being here and now. Even if this idea of transcendence, of overcoming, takes on the form of a transcendence within immanence, to use Husserl's expression. Even when the transcendence emerges from an interpretation of nature, as in neo-shamanism. But this is not enough, being still too inclusive. So we need a third point. This global conception and its idea of a way out must be susceptible of practical, individual and collective expression. It must have three kinds of expressions: institutional, moral, and what I call technological. The first, technological. In fact, what I'm meaning technological, I mean spiritual technology. Spiritual technology covers the range of rituals, prayer, meditation, techniques, practiced individually or collectively. People must meet in certain places at certain times, so there is a communalization process through the collective use of this specific spiritual technology. B, we need codes of conduct, prescriptions, projections of ideal behaviors, explicitly expressed or at least implicitly present through images. A code that have to be coherent with the global conception of reality. And C, and last but not least, there must be some kind of institution, organization, church, whatever it may be, even at least an association. With those three criteria, you can include all religions, new and ancient, and only religions, with all specific religious social functions. No art, no philosophy. And if you retain that definition in mind, you realize that all the debate about spiritualization of the society or no more closely resembles a rhetorical quarrel than a true scientific analysis. In fact, you can realize that in the current religious field, spirituality refers more to new structure of belief with its dominant aesthetic than to a crossover from religion to spirituality. The most important part, actually, in the definition is the first point, a global conception of reality. This global conception must actually present itself in the form of a tale, of a story, but not like any tale. It doesn't have to be, it can't be only a cold formal theory. It must be a kind of scenario in which we can play a part. That is what we commonly call a myth. A myth is not only found in classical mythologies, it is a meta-tale. A tale that allows us to tell our little stories and also the greater story of our life in a coherent way by identification, because we identify to, for instance, to a hero for the Greek, or we identify to the Buddha in the case at least we identify to his example. We could ask why we need that meta-tale, and the answer will be anthropologically and philosophically very far-reaching and impossible to give in just an hour. But we could at least, for the use of this talk, say that this is attached to the human desire to be a moral being, somehow even stronger than the desire of eating, for instance. That's the reason why that in country, even when people are starving, if a politician wants to keep the power, he just instrumentalizes religion, and that works, even if people are starving, because the desire to be a moral being is stronger. But by moral, I mean, I don't mean moral versus immoral. I mean moral versus physical. People need to feel that they are something else than a physical being. Human beings desire to be oneself as another. I don't know if I will try. As if one was someone else, that one very physical composition. It is the story of this inner other that one is telling that gives the meaning to one's life, to one's behaviors. That is the reason why we talk to ourselves like if we were looking at ourselves from elsewhere. Sometimes even using, you were wrong to do that. Using the you, like if you were talking to someone else, but it's actually this other you that you want to be. Or today you'll have to give a keynote lecture. Will you be good enough? This moral you is actually what You try to be what you would like to be. It's all about identification. And identification, just remind you, it's exactly the opposite of singularity, because identification is identity, the fact that you can recognize yourself in front of a mirror every day, thinking, oh, it's really me, so I can tell the story of this me every day, because it has a necessary continuity. It's the identity. There is something identical. So religions are some kind of factories specialized in providing those meta-tales to allow people to tell the particular story of their life. We will call this religious dimension the desire to be, which means in reality and paradoxically that you cannot simply be, but you want to become someone. Now, if we come back to Buddhism, we must ask the question, what do they want to be, those Western Buddhists? And more specifically, what do they want to be, and how do they want to be seen when they say they don't belong to a religion, but they practice spirituality? Why some of them need to pretend that what is objectively religious is not? Sorry. We actually cannot take the word, the significant spirituality in the mouth of the Buddhist or in the mouth of anyone else practicing a modern spirituality, pretending he is not at all a religious person but a spiritual one, seriously. We can't take these words seriously. We cannot infer a kind of deep spiritualization on the level of the signified, in the same way as not so long ago the impending secularization of the world was a foregone conclusion. I mean that, for instance, you can be interviewing a guy with his head entirely shaved off, wearing a smart kimono, seated on a tatami facing a statue of Buddha, and when you ask him if he is a Buddhist, and I have met many of the kind, both in a Buddhist but also in spiritual environments, generally speaking, and he will answer, no, I'm not. In fact, to understand what he means and resolve the paradox of the situation, you need first to understand the structure of his very belief. He actually wants to tell you that he is more Buddhist than anyone could be, because he is so individually liberated that he is even liberated from Buddhism. If you don't pay attention to the structure of his belief, you might take his answer too seriously and completely miss the point. I actually call this category of Buddhists the ultra or hyper-Buddhists. In French, I use a pun, so people that are used to French, I said, jusque bouddhiste, who say that goes even more that you can go, that you can be. You know, now the jusque Buddhist, hyper-Buddhist. So we really need to focus our attention on the words used by believers and to the definition they try to give to their own religious activity. A great number of objective Buddhists will tell you that they are not religious at all, because Buddhism is merely a form of spirituality and not a religion. They could add, of course, or substitute. It is a way of life, as I said earlier, a philosophy, a therapy of mind, a science of the mind. I mean, I have a complete lexicon on that, but you can go for forever almost. So once again, if you carefully pay attention to the belief structure of the believer, you will find, for instance, that to his mindset, the word religion is negatively connoted. And you will also find that this believer needs to maintain some coherence in his representation he has of himself as a non-religious person. Since he was a and I have met some of them in France at least, so that's the reason why I give this case. Since he was a very militant Marxist during the 70s and then turned to be a Buddhist in the 80s and a Tibetan Buddhist engaged in the 90s. So he said, yes, I'm a Buddhist, but basically I don't believe in anything. I'm just a Buddhist. No matter whether one recites mantras every day facing Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, because the latter will not be a divinity but only a mental metaphor. Or it doesn't matter if one is worshipping and blindly following an omnipotent guru, one is completely free of everything. One doesn't obey to anyone but one's inner self. All this part of the structure of the specific belief, not less religious than any other kind of reputedly is not less religious than any other kind of reputedly religious belief. The answer provided by such believer, pretending not to be a believer because everything is in his or her belief, is supposed to be about experience, must therefore not be taken seriously to the extent that there actually exists a spiritualization of society, a spiritual turn, as some sociologists will put it. Another believer following the teachings of the Dalai Lama and some other lamas initiated to the highest tantras will also tell you that he is not practicing Buddhism as a religious practice. But soon enough you will discover that he is in fact a Catholic, that he might even be a priest. I have met some of them that are in the same time a priest and needs to pretend, of course, that they are not, that it's not a religion, that it's something else. Or that he is a very faithful practicing Jew, and this time that it is not because he perceived the word religion in a negative way. It is not that he is obstinate in his denial of the religious nature of his Buddhist belief and practice, that he denies that Buddhism is a religion, but because he doesn't want to appear himself and to others as a renegade to his own tradition and identity, even if it doesn't provide him with the imaginary framework he needs anymore. Once again, it cannot be concluded at all from such first-hand testimonies that we are indeed in the presence of a phenomenon of spiritualization. Even if, of course, something has indeed changed, and changed deeply, it is in the structure of the religious belief. A change that implies a certain criticism, socio-historically determined, of the very word religion, with all the images pertaining to it: inquisition, hierarchy, imposition, external morality, belief in an almighty God, etc. Regarding the persistence of religion in America versus Europe, for instance, because it is one of the theses very known in sociology, in the field of sociology, in particular the belief in a supernatural being called God, it is interesting to take into account the evolution of the popular definition of what God actually is. I happened to be recently attending a symposium where I was coordinating a research committee on the definition and indefinition of religion. And there were a Swedish sociologist working on the belief of sick people having a terminal cancer, and demonstrated that whereas most of them didn't believe in God, a regular pattern in Swedish society today, and they find themselves as atheists, they nevertheless believed, in their majority, in a connection between themselves and nature, believing in the meaning of nature, in a connectedness, in the meaning of energy. Nature by becoming a kind of mysterious, metaphysical, meaningful power, transcendent in a certain way, personal, because the connection they felt was personal, really could thus be considered as another definition of God. Conversely, what is still called God by currently declared believers resembles the mysterious, metaphysical, meaningful power of nature, their very essence, the very essence of this connectedness, which appears to be the core belief of many atheists. So even in the case of the apparent contemporary split in belief between religious people and atheists, we have rather a differential in ways of believing the same thing, which we have called Individuo-globalism, and I will come later. Indeed, immensely different from what was believed by the common man in the former century, even in the name of God. I think the success of Buddhism is related to the fact that its doctrinal structure allows more easily to include these kind of notions, like the notion of energy, through, for instance, the concept of pratitya samutpada, translated as universal causal involvement. I don't know how I can translate that to French. Sorry. Sorry. I have to find my piece. Okay. So, yeah. Shit. This one, yeah. So, such appropriate words also constitute the wrapping of the type of distinctive religious aesthetics I am discussing. I use the word aesthetic, religious aesthetics, because aesthetics is paradoxically deep, directly linked with the desire to be that I expressed earlier. The way you dress, you talk, express a certain desire to be. A monk dresses as a monk to tell the story of his life. A hippie let his hair grow and wear a purple shirt for that too, to give to himself and others an account of the role he wants to play in a certain meta-tale, meta-story. My main point is that the success of Buddhism is less on a matter of the number of actual members of Buddhist groups than of the number of the people that feel somehow like if they were Buddhist, is the manifestation of a deep change in the dominant meta-tale in industrial advanced societies. And that is the reason, just also a thing, and I think this point also explains why you have some people that want to maintain a certain, that are really involved in Buddhist groups, and they somehow fight against people that are more not so involved and pretend to be Buddhist but don't believe what they are supposed to believe. They don't care about the Four Noble Truths, for instance, etc., etc. And there is kind of a fight. I will say that Buddhism, in a way, is victim of its success, its ideological success. I think, and that is the reason why, apart from Asia, global Buddhism is growing mostly in those countries, the richest one on the planet, not in Africa, for instance. Contrary to most of my colleagues, I don't think that we are facing a multiplication of different beliefs within our societies. But on the contrary, we are facing a global unification of belief, I think. And what we usually see as different beliefs are in reality only different aesthetics. Western Buddhism is actually one of the major laboratories where this new belief system, this new meta-tale, is fabricated. That explains also why, even in other religious non-Buddhist groups, you will have some kind of infiltration, what I could call an infiltration of Buddhist concepts, even if they are bad interpreted. That's not the point here. Let's see. So about this multiplication, the idea occurred to me after analyzing a long interview I had carried out with a Zen Buddhist who, to substantiate his choice of what he posited as his practice, stated that Zen was consistently, essentially sober, black and white, strict, straight, that everything was a question of posture. I was unable to detect anything in his discourse clearly related to a specificity of Buddhist doctrine, or even remotely so. Later on, among Westerners adopting Tibetan Buddhism, I was to observe something of a roughly similar nature. Conversely, in Tibetan Buddhism, such subjects will tend to appreciate the colorful atmosphere, the music, the fact that one, for instance, dresses in purple, that one can sit whatever one likes, that you are even, in some groups, free to leave the meditation room when you feel like it, which would be inconceivable in the middle of any Zen teaching seminar. After a year interviewing people belonging to Buddhist groups, at the time mostly in France and in Europe, I was able to pick up regular behavior patterns. Such patterns were linked to questions of style, of taste, which initially brought people to decide to opt for one particular group rather than another. On still closer observation, it was possible to single out other more socio-economic patterns, regularities. In other words, from the point of view of socio-economic patterns, Buddhist groups, at least French and European Buddhist groups, can be distributed into the three following majority subcategories: followers of Zen, followers of Tibetan Buddhism, and Soka Gakkai. Roughly then, I'm talking only of converted Buddhists, to use the Charles Prebish category. So only about the one that are converted to Buddhism. Roughly then, in the case of Zen, we have highest income levels, material capital, highest educational achievers, cultural capital, most highly developed network with the political, business, intellectual, media world, social capital. To put it in a nutshell, the highest global capital. Then comes Tibetan Buddhism, almost on the par, but socially less upper crust, notably endowed with lower social and cultural capital, usually gender focused towards female rather than male. Finally, Soka Gakkai Buddhism, with the lowest score in material, cultural, and social capital. As a matter of fact, it is the only subgroup, the only French Buddhist group where people of Maghrebin, from Arabic countries origin, from poor suburban area can be found. So we obtain a pattern of differentials in religious style and taste, dovetailing with differentials in socio-economic backgrounds. It is not original to note, it is not original to mention, to note that a certain taste is correlated to a certain socio-economic class. Of course, style, distinctions, taste depend on the social milieu from which you originate, when you like Bach, you usually come from a certain socio-economic background. It may appear more surprising to find that the same holds true concerning religious beliefs and practices. When describing what one might call the plurality of contemporary religious tastes, ranging from a kind of aristocratic Zen through a slightly less elitist Tibetan Buddhism down to the more vulgar Soka Gakkai. Step by step, I could see that the model worked with some variations and subtleties outside Buddhism and primarily with New Agers, but also was extensible to the whole religious field in general. New Age is the post-industrial phenomenon par excellence. It is not to be found in poor countries or only among small groups of people who are part of the very, very, very happy few, like Buddhism in the very poor country, except, of course, from Asia. Over the last 7 years, postgraduate students from the Observatoire du Religieux have been carrying out fieldworks on New Age and Buddhist groups, and we have come up time and again with the same patterns as initially described among Buddhist groups. Differentials in religious aesthetics, modes of beliefs, detailing with different socio-economic background, but with, strangely enough, always the same basic belief structure in the background. And it is that I actually call Individuo-globalism. So try to explain what it is. In almost all interviews, we were able to detect behind the modes of belief the aesthetic description of one or another belief and practice, the same dogmatic frame. On the one hand, expressed, of course, in different phraseology, in diverse phraseology, we will encounter the emphasis on the individual, his or her personal development, a deep care for the self, a kind of sacralization of the self, its well-being, its accomplishment, its inner life. But on the other hand, we will encounter a strong emphasis on the global universe, on cosmic awareness, including discourses on the environment, the earth, nature, the purity of nature, its authenticity, its infinity, etc., etc., etc. We therefore obtain a simultaneous emphasis both on the deepest, more personal intimacy and on the most global universality. Two transcendent goals are those two transcendent goals are thus intertwined, as if what is happening in my inner mind-body system was directly plugged into the cosmos, to nature as a whole, and conversely, and as if what was happening in the outer world, even the furthest reaches of the universe, was directly linked back to myself. But this relation is not objective, not some cold, purely causal consequence, but a subjective, metaphysical, or metaphysically subjective link. We are thus connected, as if nature did indeed possess some sort of language, as if she were talking to each other, to each and every one of us individually, and conversely, as if we were talking back to nature, addressing her through the intermediary of our actions, through words, in a way. It might thus be said that nature is henceforth interpreted as a supernatural reality. The self-evident cosmic connection is at the core of Individuo-globalism. The aforesaid dogmatic structure has with the time morphed into the predominant, overreaching belief system in advanced industrial society. In other words, it became an invisible orthodoxy, something that looks natural. It's not even worth to say, of course, it is that. So overwhelming and overreaching that most believers will indeed deny its being as dogmatic or religious, but it is actually what is a dogma about. Because when a dogma is really playing the role of a dogma, it is not perceived as a dogma because it's supposed to be natural. You can't discuss it because it's natural, because it's like that. You don't discuss it. So it is actually what is a dogma. When a dogma is perceived as a dogma, it is not a dogma anymore, because that means it's somewhere, and in the place where it is, you can discuss it. You can start to say, oh, it's not what it is, maybe it's not true, it's true. Yeah. And instead, we more likely... These new system, as all system of belief data, has certain consequences. One of the consequences is the change of the institutional structures of religion. That's the reason why, but we'll have to discuss it. We have now the ideal institutional structure for religion, and of course from Buddhism, is becoming NGOs, because it can respond to global involvement, and at the same time it involves also personally. And there are also consequences in the core belief that we can find now in the entire society, if you are Buddhist or if you are not, or being Buddhist or not Buddhist. For instance, the belief is what we can call, a new specific transcendent object, energy. Everybody is talking about energy today. You enter, even it's becoming so natural. You enter in a room, you say, oh, I feel bad energy. Oh, it's such a good energy. And or you want to eat a yogurt. I don't know if I will buy this yogurt. I don't know if there are some energy. And you think that vitamin is energy, which is not scientifically. But now vitamin is the energy, of course. Energy is everywhere. And why? Also, it's also because it is simultaneously natural and supernatural, intimate, intra-human, and cosmic, planetary, and even extraplanetary. Individual and global. Energy is everywhere today. It is actually the main object of cult of individuo-globalism. And what is really interesting is that even if in a way it is not at the core of Buddhism, even of tantric Buddhism, when people practice energies to reach something that is not, energy is not the main thing. It's just a way to go somewhere else. Even if so, when you talk with Buddhists, I'm not talking about intellectual Buddhists. I'm not talking about those Buddhists that are really insiders, really practicing Buddhism regularly, because those ones, they are not numerous at all. What is important is actually the ideological spread. And so talk with these people that goes once in a while to a teaching of the Dalai Lama, or sometimes they will do a retreat of Vipassana, and after the retreat of Vipassana, they do a little Tai Chi because it's so much the same thing, They will all talk with you about energy, and that what they do, they feel such a great energy, And it will talk like a supernatural object. So to summarize on that thing, people believe the same thing, is what I will try. People believe the same things, or adhere approximatively to the same patterns of belief, while individually choosing to belong to different groups apparently matching to their personal taste, itself correlated with their respective socio-economic positions. But the question which might subsequently be raised is, what is it, in fact, which really brings dominant people to generally choose certain religious groups rather than others? We haven't answered this question yet. Why? In other words, why do certain standards of religious aesthetics better dovetail with a specific kind of socio-economic cultural milieu? Why to again have recourse to the example of Buddhist groups, do the dominant groups grant the suffrage to Zen, less to Soka Gakkai, for instance? This question inevitably leads to the necessity of isolating specificities in each of these groups. After quite some time, I hit on the obvious. Soka Gakkai was the only westernized Buddhist group within which the dimension of collective emotion is a fundamental ingredient. just as in neo-evangelical and Pentecostal group in Christianity, wherein a majority of adherents originating from low social economic background remains overwhelmingly observable. It is the only group where you can find that. In Zen Buddhism, quite to the contrary, it is rather the personal involvement of each individual which is at stake. At this point, I will not have the time to really develop the three ideal types that I will point out now, but I will say that in the general religious field, I could isolate three types of what I call aesthetics, as I told you, three types. But aesthetics is not pejorative, because it's very important. Because aesthetic is the way you live your life and you give a meaning to your life, etc. You present yourself. Nothing is done at random, so it's very important. So those three aesthetics I call them, the first one is spiritualism, the second one is charismatism, the third one is fundamentalism. The first one, spiritualism, is the one also that I call the one for the rational insiders. People that's... I have to explain why I said rational for spiritualism. Because the etymology of rationality, ratio, is not reason. Ratio means division. Ratio on your calculatrice, on your computer, means division. And so the rational type are the one in advanced industrial society that conceive their religion, even if they don't call it religion, as a rational path, meaning they divide their strain, their effort. So they do, for instance, they will do yoga every day at a certain hour or every week to reach a certain point. They will spare their effort. They will calculate what they do. Even if they look, everything is cool, etc., everything is not cool. It's not cool at all. Because they will do yoga at a certain hour, they will eat only vegetables, and they will do certain things, and they will always be rational in what they do, because they will divide their effort with certain reach. And it is like the spiritual one. So they will do yoga, they will do meditation in this way and many other things. Even if they practice Dzogchen, for instance, like supposed to be the highest Tibetan vehicle, which is conceived by Tibetans themselves as being the highest vehicles in itself. Even if they practice Dzogchen and they are supposed to not do anything, not even do anything when they think they do anything and they don't do anything, but they will do it anyway in a rational way, Because they will go in a certain point. They will want to reach something that is not supposed to be something, so they don't want to reach it, but actually they want to, So it is what I call the rational one, the spiritualism, and you can find only in the richest country of the world, and when you find them in poor country, that's always the richest people of this country. Always. We'll discuss about that, maybe. If we try to find a kind of explanation, but we will try later to find a kind of explanation, because it will be too long, I'll pass the second one. The second one, the charismatism way, it's people that I will call that have, how could I say, emotional deficit. So that they need to be collective. They need to be with many people. And they are the one usually that have the lowest economic material level. And so these people obviously need compensation through emotional increments. And emotion has also another particularity. Emotion is, the negation of time. Because rationality is actually time. Because rationality is, you can be patient. Because what you can do today, you will do it tomorrow. Because you have a plausible horizon. You desire to become something, but you know it's possible because you have enough to eat, you have enough to go around. So you want something else, you want more, and you can have it rationally because you have time to think about it. But when you don't have time to think about it, you better not, because it's not plausible for you. Because it's not possible anyway, because you don't have enough to eat anyway. So you need emotion, you need collective emotion, you need that. You don't get the thing by doing yoga, meditation, or Buddhist practice. You don't get it, but it comes to you right away. Right away, meaning in no time, emotionally, by your feeling. You know, it comes now. And the third I call fundamentalism is what I could call like not rational, not emotional, but reactional. And it is not the people, it's people that somehow they could have what they need materially. But what they don't have, what they miss is something symbolic, what we call today identity. They are not recognized as they would like to be recognized. So they react. They want to find, because they feel scared in this society, they feel scared about the world, they feel scared about globalization, they feel scared in general. And so they recreate an origin, something that will be very fundamental, something that will protect them. And so those reactional one, actually the two last categories, you don't find them, you hardly find them in Buddhism, but you can. But in a very, very, very minority. And the last one, you almost don't find it in Buddhism, but you can. You have some of them in Sri Lanka, for instance, reactional Buddhists that could be really fundamentalist because they have to react to something they don't want symbolically, to an image of themselves or an image of the nation or something like that. But you also find that. I have found them actually during my research for my dissertation, even in Western countries. You have some reactional Buddhist people that have an interpretation of Buddhism as coming back to Indo-European roots. You have that in a very, very, I admit, very small groups, like you can count them almost on the hand, but you also have that. So why Buddhism is so successful? I think it's so successful because it took, in a way, the leadership of the spiritualism. For what reason? For, I think, many reasons could be pointed out. One of the reasons is actually the dogmatic structure of Buddhism itself that allows those kind of rational interpretations to change yourself and to do all those things that people want to do. And there is also, I think, historical conjunction. For instance, a personality like the personality of the Dalai Lama, or there are many other. Maybe we can discuss that in a discussion. I don't know what time is it because there.
If you wrapped up soon, then we can move to discussion, question and answer, and maybe many things.
Now, the fact I'm arriving at the part where I told you, remember, if I have enough time, I explain this other part, or I say it's finished. You know, so I don't know if I carry on, but okay. At least I could say that I said earlier. I'll try to summarize the last part a little bit. I said earlier that religion is about meta-tale, meta-story, about trying to play a role, so in a meta-scenario, in a scenario within we actually fit. So this scenario, the individual global scenario, is actually a scenario. Has three, like in all scenario, three major scenes. In all scenario, you need to have, I don't know how you say, decor. How do you say that? In a different decor? Different decor. When you have a film, you have different decor. To play the role you want to play, you need different. Yeah, okay. You say decor? Yeah. Really? Wow, great. Interesting. So 3 major decor. So there are 3 major decor on which people desire to play a current life nowadays. Like that are the main decors of individual globalism. I call them hyper-tradition, hyper-science, and hyper-nature. If I use the word hyper, it's because hyper in Greek means more than. So you want more than. You don't know exactly more than what, but you want more than. It's more than. It's over already. So when I say hyper-tradition, it's like if it is a tradition that is supposed to be more than any traditions, that is supposed to have some kind of specificity that you can find everywhere, and that is actually the truth, And in what I call hyper-science, exactly the same with science. It's like if you have a science that is a bad science nowadays, the science that created industrial society that is formal, that dirt everything. And apart from that, you have a hyper-science becoming a decor of individual globalism, part of the religious thing. A hyper-science where you can find something that is really true, that will be actually linked with hyper-tradition, And the other one, you will have hyper-nature, a nature completely reconstructed, as being something positive, something really, really meaningful that has also some kind of truth. And I think if Buddhism was so successful, it's also because it was able to represent those three scenes, those 3 decors, almost simultaneously. For instance, in the personality of someone like a Dalai Lama, like he represents like the hyper-tradition. That is tradition without all the defects that we don't like in tradition. Hyper-science, and the Dalai Lama really plays very well these role for hyper-tradition, specifically in those books where he is doing a dialogue with scientists that even ask them advices about their own science, to say, is it true what I found? And the Dalai Lama said, I don't know, because I'm not a scientist. Yes, but what do you think about it? And so I say, okay, I think it's interesting, and blah, 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 blah. And the people are so content about what they hear. And at the end of the book, it's what I call a dialectical process that constructed a new orthodoxy at the end. Because at first, you have 2 people that are dialoguing, like dialectic, and step by step, we approach of a definition of what is the right science, what is the hyper-science, and everything else is just crap, And Buddhism helped to define it, to define what is the real science, that has always been the real science. And at the end, you will even have, but the Buddha was the first real scientist. Anyway, And you will have the same thing with hyper-nature. And again, the Dalai Lama will be the manifestation of the hyper-nature that was stolen for him, like the Himalaya, of whom everybody dreams are the pure part not only of nature, but of themselves. Like, wow, the Himalaya, that's so pure and incredibly great. Okay. And to finish, maybe now, this scenario, because there is a scenario, there is the scenario where you tell yourself your life, etc. You have the different decors, but you also have the different themes. Because in a scenario when you need to tell yourself what you are doing, you need the theme of the story itself. There are 3 main themes in which Buddhism has participated, at least on the ideological level, the external ideological level, for people that think that somehow they are Buddhist, even if they don't really practice. The first one is self-knowledge, the second one is well-being, the third one is creativity. And in all the interview that I could have with people in those outside circle of Buddhists, not the Buddhists that are actually practicing really regularly and they will talk about the Four Noble Truths and all that, but the other one that are for me more interesting on a sociological point of view. You will also have these recurrent themes in their discourse, in the way they will talk about themselves. They will even know more of those themes than the Four Noble Truths or other point of the doctrine. Thank you.